I'm keen to get going. We are about a minute past 1 and we have a full agenda, so if we could assemble, that would be great. Thank you. For those that haven't been at the meeting before, we have done we've done the appropriate formalities at the start of our workshop this morning with the Karakea, and we're reconvening, and so we will go straight into the formal part of our meeting, not the non-workshop part, now as we go into it. So I'd like to start with the apologies. I got apologies from Kesh and Angela. Are there any others that we should note at this stage, Miss, your team?
We'll just note in the minutes that in Kesh's absence that Anna is, as Deputy Chair, is taking on her responsibilities for this committee.
Right, thank you. Oh, and look, while one is staff, could I also just note probable obviously lateness from Lance firstly, and also from Paula. They have been at a meeting in Auckland. I know they're racing back to try and be with us this afternoon. Kesh, Angela, Paula, and it's always good to note that our Chief Executive is keen to be here too, and those two, an apology for lateness. I'll move from the Chair that we sustain those apologies. Thank you, Ewan. Any discussion? I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, it's carried. We've got the agenda as published. I just want to make one late change, please, but we think it just makes better for order. Item 13, which is other independent assurance, updates and reports from Sarah. We'd like to move up to effectively a new number 9. So it comes between risk management and the KPMG internal audit report. It just ties in better with the agenda. I'm sorry for that late change, but I think with minimum fuss we can make that as a change, and we will run it that way. Gary, I assume that you have or will let Sarah know. In fact, is Sarah here? I don't know if I haven't seen her yet, but I'm sure she will be here pretty soon. Are there any matters of interest people would like to note about the agenda? Look, I just need to update you on two. One is under the open item in terms of the risk. We are going, well, there is the possibility that we may be discussing the work of MPI and Biosecurity New Zealand over the HN51 bird flu issue. I chair the risk committee at MPI. At this stage, I don't see there's any reason why that should stop me either from participating or chairing, but I just would like to do that. Under the closed session, I would like to give you perhaps some more detail about an interest I have as a director of a company called Regional Software Holdings Limited, and it relates to the cyber security paper. That's why I'd like to just indicate my interest in PX. But for the public record, I would like it to be on record that I have that interest, and I will explain more in detail briefly when we commence the PX session. So if that's okay, that would be good. Thank you. We have Mr. Stratford as a member of the public that would like to present to us. Welcome to the meeting, Mr. Stratford. Appreciate that. As I understand it from standing orders, Mr. Stratford, I'd invite you to provide your comments, but if you could limit them, please, to 5 minutes and no more.
Indeed.
Then I would invite committee members, if they have questions of fact or clarification that they would like to ask of you, I'm prepared to entertain those briefly. But we will not be having a debate in a policy sense in terms of what your comments are. So welcome to the meeting. It's always good to have a member of the public at an Audit and Risk Committee meeting, and I look forward to your comments, please.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate this opportunity. I just want to make some comments on two of the items on the agenda, on the Chief Executive's report. You talk about increasing the risk of staff turnover. I'd prefer to use the term the prospect of staff turnover. We need to have a positive attitude to staff turnover. It brings to mind what has been in the papers over the last few days about the proposal to extend the term of council from 3 years to 4 years. we've been told that the campaign process is quite rigorous and that all the qualifications of the candidates will be put forward before the public. In my view, there should be no need for an induction for new elected councillors to settle in. They should already know what they're doing before they're elected. That's why they're standing for council. The second point, I'd like to refer you to the comments on characterising the new government's reforms as political decisions. This just goes to show how irresponsible the last 2 or 3 councils have been in terms of its ignoring its spending obligations to spend responsibly and to deliver essential services and core infrastructure. In my view, these are apolitical decisions, and whichever side is in government, we always need to pay attention to these issues. That brings me to the point of 2 senior councils in the past month have made it quite clear the water meters are coming. I believe that this just demonstrates how exactly why we need to focus on these core essential services and core infrastructure. We need to write into the letter of expectation quite clearly that the interests of the family must be the primary focus of any measures regarding the introduction of water meters. I spoke to 3 plumbers in the past couple of weeks. They're opposed to it, and I can see they're having to check their own work by putting copious amounts of water through the sink and the pipes in order to check their own work as to see whether they've done their job properly. I don't think people will be happy with the plumbers being inhibited by the fact that their customers will want them to use as less water as possible. It will impact on the quality of the work of the plumbers. So there we have it. I'm very pleased with the report, Chief Executive report, and I wish you all well. Thank you.
Mr. Stratton, thank you for that, and thank you for keeping to within the time
Oh,
that I appreciate
appreciate that.
Before you go,
yes.
I would offer members a chance to raise questions with you if anybody has any questions. Do you have any? Thank you, Mr. Stratford. Appreciate your time. That's been wonderful. Thank you. I always have to be corrected in my chairing at least once in a meeting, and I should have passed a motion that my agreement to change the agenda so that item 13 becomes a new 9 is agreed. So I will move from the chair that we should change the agenda as I proposed. I have a seconder. Thank you, Ewan. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, it's carried. Thank you very much. Hopefully that's the only time I need to be corrected today, but thank you, Mish. I appreciate you keeping me on the straight and narrow. The first item 5 to deal with is the minutes from our last meeting, which was 10th of December 2024. So I'd like a chocolate fish that I haven't mentioned. Happy New Year to you all. So that's not too bad. So 10th of December, I'm going to move from the chair. We take them as a thank you, Maxine. Is there any matters of accuracy or correctness in these that people would like to raise? Look like the meeting. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, it's carried. There were a couple of staff items in there which I just wondered whether they had been acted on. I see them as being minor if they haven't. There were things like, I think there was staff action for a request that there be something on gold clams. Dare I say it involves MPI. I don't think I've seen anything on gold clams in this report, so not a big drama. I would just remind if one of you as a member raised that, you're welcome to raise it when we get to the strategic risk section as well, which would be great. Okay, thank you for that. If we could then, well, actually, we need Lance here to talk to his report, or is one of you being delegated to raise it while Lance is not here, guys?
No, look, I haven't been delegated, but I'm sorry, but I thought there had been a request for his item to be the last on the agenda.
Okay.
Because he doesn't expect to be here in time.
Thanks for that, Sean. So we will move that to the point when he's here, or last on the list, and that's out of the need. We've already sustained his apology, so we know that. That gets us then into the health and safety report. So Dan and Marie, welcome. Well, just Dan, welcome to the meeting, buddy. In your hands, please.
Thank you. Yes, just me today. Unfortunately, Marie's unable to join, so I'll do my best. So look, like always, we'll sort of take the report as read, but just did want to highlight just a couple of points just to get things started. Look, just a note that we've had overall a small reduction in safety events from this quarter to the previous one. We have seen a slight reduction in the number of LTIs and medical treatment cases in comparison to the previous quarter and kind of this time last year, but nothing significant. However, we did see a noticeable increase in the number of events reported involving aggressive and intimidating behaviour, which started at the tail end of the previous quarter in October, and then sort of carried through into November and December, which is inclusive of this reporting period. But based on sort of trend lines and sort of previous data, we sort of normally do see an increase as we sort of head into those summer months, as members of the public sort of enjoy our facilities and more people are out and about. And then we have seen the continued historical sort of trend where those tail off around sort of February, March. The other thing I just wanted to just highlight was the ISO 45001 audit. I know we've spoken about that for some time and included in previous reports. Look, we are pleased to have engaged with Talak NZ, and look, we'll be looking to kick off that audit in June. It's broken into two stages. We'll complete the first stage, which is largely localised to our kind of corporate, overarching policies, processes and procedures, and then providing we kind of get a green light and are able to move through into the next stage, then we'll move out into some of our operational areas. So look, I'll pause there and happy just to take any questions or comments.
Thank you, Dan. Again, a fulsome report, and I appreciate the good established way in which you're dealing with the folk. Do we have questions? So, yes, Max, please.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks for your report. Pleasing results, I guess, if we think about the reduction in the incidents, etc. Usually we have a health and safety committee reports and minutes and things coming through this paper. Has there been a change in that, or is it just that we haven't had these meetings as yet?
The Safety Governance Committee meeting we combined last year leading up into Christmas with the Strategic Risk Workshop. But we have since met again. We've had a safety reset, so we met earlier this month. So there'll be minutes and information included in the next report that we submit.
Okay. And anything to report early from that meeting? Often you've talked about it being held in different parts of the business and the value that that brings?
Yeah, we'll certainly look to continue to take that meeting to our facilities and other operational areas. We think it's an important part of connecting and understanding the front line. We did have a good meeting in February. We used the Tony Gibson case that was, recently in the media as a learning opportunity, just to make sure that we've got the right things in place and that You know, as an executive team, we're focused on the right things in terms of kind of governance and due diligence to help support this committee as well. So very good meeting overall. Yep, next one will be scheduled out on one of our operational sites.
Thanks, Dan.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Dan, a couple of questions from me, if that's okay. Always interested from a sort of a systems perspective how we're going. I don't want to dismiss the results, etc., and I understand that. But look, just probably firstly in relationship to sort of a follow-on to Max's question, I'm looking at paragraph 18. You talk about a safety governance reset. So something's happening with the system. So what can you give me a better sense? What do you mean by a safety governance reset? And does that involve us, given we're part of governance?
Yes and no. So it was more geared around looking forward to the year ahead, what we wanted to achieve as a safety governance committee, taking some previous learnings, but also how we continue to apply, the learnings from our sites. We spoke about the ISO 45001 audit, the importance of that, to provide a benchmark as well as sort of key learnings going forward. I think for us it was just an opportunity to take a pause, look at the calendar year ahead, and making sure that we're really clear in terms of some of the things that we wanted to achieve. So Greg Desley, as our independent chair, initially led that conversation, but again it's just to create that dialogue, just make sure that we're on the right track, and doing the appropriate things so that we can then inform this committee going forward.
Brilliant. Oh, look, that's good. Again, partly it's sort of systems, but the practical need for us is to have good champions in the organisation, and of course that's clearly around, in my view, around the Health and Safety Committee. And at paragraph 23, you put the phrase "designed to lift confidence."
Yes.
And I wanting you to interpret for me, because it could be that you're telling me. And we should be worried. If they are in despair, you're trying to lift their confidence, or is it more a case of you're trying to build on the confidence they already have? There is a big difference, and I think important to the tone and culture within the organisation.
So really good question. We brought all of our health and safety reps together again, I think earlier this month, out at the Rotorua Library. Really good turnout. Look, we've got about 60, 70 odd folk that joined us there. Look, we have had some turnover in our health and safety reps, and so there are a number of new health and safety reps that were sort of joining us for the first time. I guess as part of their sort of kind of induction and kind of how we bring them up to speed, we want them to be confident going out into their teams and work areas, knowing what information they've got, guidelines, but also the tools that they can draw upon to better serve and provide a safe space. So it was more around sort of lifting their confidence, that sort of collegial, forum, and sharing from experiences. And so that was a really, really good day. We sort of took a lot out of that. And again, it's just sort of providing that ongoing support, education and guidance for our health and safety reps, who play a really important part, and part of that employee engagement pillar, which makes up our health and safety framework. And as I said, there are a number of new ones that were first joining, and so it was a great way for us to sort of kind of induct them a little bit better.
Brilliant. That's great. Thank you for that. Sarah.
Yeah. Thanks, Dan. I have one question around paragraph 12 and the increase in the number of dealing with aggressive and or violent people, and then it's mentioned again as a risk in a report further down the agenda. Which areas of council are we seeing the increase in? Is it seasonal with hotter weather, for example, and did we see a similar bump in that kind of interaction, in previous years?
Yep. So what we have seen through trending is that we do see a lift as we sort of head into those summer months. So it's not different to what we've seen in previous years. This time we sort of saw the majority of those events take place around our parking enforcement, our parking wardens, as well as animal control. So looking at those events through this reporting period, the majority would have been in those two business units.
Okay.
The types of events that we sort of see are offensive language, threatening behaviour, intimidation, and then sort of threats of violence and threats of property damage to our facilities.
Right.
So none of them resulted in any injury or assault, but we do record those and act upon those. And in the report you would see that we just, in terms of kind of the wraparound support, increased security, de-escalation training, lone worker devices, and if I probably just draw your attention to, which is a really good news story, is around our situational awareness map. And so we've recently launched that. That allows us to plot areas and addresses where where there's a known situation or events that sort of provide us a history. So that way, if we have council staff returning to those areas and residents, that they can go forearmed in terms of preparing a risk assessment, as well as being more prepared in the event that those types of events may take place again. So just again, it's just about sort of providing those sort of tools, education, as well as sort of debriefing when those events take place, so that we can take any learnings and look at what we could do better. But overall, those events, we do see them as seasonal. As we sort of hit those summer months, we get more people out visiting, out in public, visiting our facilities, and so we do often see an escalation of those events around that time.
Okay.
What I can say is that that trend line has tapered off already, so generally we sort of see it after that sort of Christmas, New Year period. So we're already sort of seeing that tail off from February onwards. Yeah.
Okay, thank
Great
you.
question, thank you.
Yep.
Great. I was going to ask about the same thing as Sarah. And my question was really, is there anything more we can do to support our staff? But you've sort of outlined really nicely, Dan, all the amazing things we are doing. So I guess that's probably my first question. Is there anything else we could do? And then my second question was just around the TALARC audit and the reporting of any findings of that. I'm assuming they'll go to that safety group, but also come up to this committee. Would that be fair?
Yeah, that's certainly our plan. Look, we would like and look to include the report findings through this committee, as well as sharing with our safety governance committee as well. Yeah, we'd like to think we're doing as much as we can, but there is always further things that we can do. I know Kelvin is here, who looks after our animal control, and just from your perspective, Kelvin, I just wonder, is there anything else that you think we could or should be doing in that space to keep our people safe out in the public?
Look, thank you for the opportunity. Look, I'm just having the conversation, that very same thing. Are we doing everything that we believe we possibly can? Yes, I believe we are. I guess the most empowering thing we can do for our staff, for a start, is to make sure they get the adequate training around risk assessments, and secondly, feel equally empowered to walk away if at any stage they feel that they are threatened or that things are getting out of control. And that's something that we've been really reinforcing. The situational awareness map gives us another opportunity to check and address whether there have been previous issues there involving our people, which allows us to make further risk assessments, to consult your supervisor, and to look at whether this might be an issue that we need to attend in conjunction with the police, for example. They have lone worker devices, they have radios, they have all of the alerting equipment. They go through extra training and refresher training, and it's around actually that continuing awareness part that we continue to to push with them about always being alert and looking for moving away if any stage you think it's getting out of control.
Cool. Thanks, Kelvin.
Are there any other questions? I just have one final one I'd like to do. You mentioned in dispatches Helen for doing good work as a leading exemplar of actually something which is actually quite critical under the Act, which is governance knowing what's actually happening. Perhaps, so I just want to acknowledge Helen, and you have, and I just want to acknowledge it as a committee that she's been out there in some sense on our behalf. Of course, it just raises then a small comparison. So I won't ask whether that's the only leading example you have, but I would just encourage governance to recognise that final step of good governance is verification. And I presume that's what Helen's been doing as far as that's concerned, and would encourage the others to do that as well. I'm sure you'd be appreciative of them coming. If there's no other questions, can we move to the resolution, please, which is that we received a very good report, Dan. Thank you, Max. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Sarah. Is there any debate on the motion? Go for it, Ewan.
Thanks. Look, I just want to, as elected member representative on the Safety Governance Committee, I just want to restate how useful these committee meetings are. And it is my observation that Hamilton City Council really does have a just culture approach. And I found, as a PCBU, I found it really insightful, the Ports of Auckland case and the significant fines that have been levied against the Chief Executive, and the reminder for all of us, both Lance and our role as governors, what the legislation can mean and the significant ramifications, and why we're all tied into taking health and safety really important. And my final comment is, I think it goes beyond just our own staff as well. I think it goes to our contractors who do a lot of contracting services with us, and ensuring that their health and safety is appropriate and up to spec. So I think it's a great initiative. I feel comfortable that we are taking this really seriously, and I congratulate Dan and your team for making sure that continues.
Max, you're happy to? Okay, in that case, I'd like to move to the motion. Can we move the motion, please? All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against? It's carried. Thank you, Dan. Appreciate your time, buddy. And can you pass on our thanks to Marie and the rest of your team too? Deeply appreciate it. Righto, we'll move to item 8, and I can see Nick coming to Star. Thank you, Nick. It's in your hands, please.
Kia ora, thank you, Chair. The Risk Management Report provides an update on the existing 7 strategic and 4 organisational risks, as well as providing specific updates on 3 of our top emerging risks. This quarter, we have also provided a few focused updates on key topics that sit under the broader strategic and organisational risks. There have been no changes to the residual risk assessments, but as the Risk Management Report identifies, there are a number of evolving and emerging trends which could shift our risks over the next quarter and beyond. Our risk owners or their delegates are available for any technical questions. Otherwise, I'm happy to take questions. Ngā mihi.
Nicholas, that's great. Short and sweet. Folk, do we have questions or comments you'd like to raise with Nick about our risk environment? We do, Sarah. Sorry, I should I can look at my screen.
All right.
Sorry.
Thanks, Nicholas. Thank you for the report. I was interested in the site-specific security risk assessments. So in terms of those that talked about actions where they haven't been taken and require budget prioritisation, but that those are more minor issues compared to those that have been worked through. So are you comfortable with where, is the organisation comfortable with where things are at with that?
I'll look to Calvin for that one, as our security manager.
Look, our desire would be, to recap, we had a consultant come through and did site assessments across all of our major sites with a view to looking at what could we improve, what was different. And it went through the full gambit from you could put another couple of security stays on this window here through to some significant capital investment to do some major overhauls. That's been put into work programs across each of the functional groups that have ownership for those particular venues, and they've worked through that. Now, the vast majority are complete or nearly complete, and there will be some residual which will have some capital, and some of which were put up as part of the LTP. I'm aware of that.
Right. Can you give me just a summary of the kinds of security risks that were being addressed?
It has always been my practice not to discuss the security arrangements in public forum.
Fair enough.
And so I'm happy to take it to another forum if you wish, but I would not be looking to do that in this forum.
Yeah, perfect, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Sarah. Nick, I want to ask sort of a macro issue around our management of our strategic risks. Which has just crossed my mind. And actually, Gary, believe it or not, I'm looking your way, mate. It's under financial risks, which of course is SR2 and significant negative impact on our financial strategy. It, along with a number of our strategic risks, are outside appetite. I'm interested to know, what does being outside appetite lead to? So we're cautious with our strategy, but we are at, if I got it right, we're high. Now, if we're outside risk, that says we do something. So I'm interested to know what that means inside Hamilton City and the organisation.
Yeah, I can probably speak to the general, what does that mean?
Yeah, no, that's good. So let's hear the macro bit, but Gary, given I've focused on financial strategy, I'll give you a chance for an answer as well.
Yeah, the best way I would describe that is that because our residual risk rating is higher than where we would feel comfortable with it sitting, it means that we have to further mitigate the risk. And so that effectively creates action, and that's why under the treatment plans, there are actions sitting under those, and that's kind of the macro level scale. And then I'll look to Gary for the more specific financials.
My reflection would be that the risk as presented is largely driven by the volatility around likelihood, and the tools and techniques we use, especially in that environment, are really about making sure we are more regularly, more frequently, and more deeply monitoring, horizon scanning, so that we can, as early as possible, present any risks that are actually materialising, and then react to those. I think that's a normal framework, but the frequency of, for example, forecasting that we look at as management will become more frequent the more volatile we have, and can become less frequent when the likelihood is lower. I think that's a principled treatment in that space.
Thank you. That's the answer I hope for. But I just want to reflect for the benefit of the committee, and I mean, in this one, Max, I presume you get it through the Finance Committee. I'm not going to put you on the spot. Are you seeing that increased forecasting? In other words, I mean, we're using forecasting as a red flag for actually, are we able to move this back towards where we want to be? And so I am keen, perhaps in a slightly different form, perhaps in a workshop, to make certain that sort of control is occurring. Otherwise, sorry, and I'm not being critical of the report in any sense of the word, it's because the report's good, it leads to the next question. Is something outside appetite getting active, either observation, management, or logical action? So, Gary, you pass go, that's good. The thing is actually, are we seeing it, Max? So it's something which perhaps at a later stage I think would be actually quite useful to discuss. So thank you for that. Carol, you got a question?
Yeah, just a quick one on the business continuity management program. And you talk in the report about once all 26 of these analyses are completed. I was just curious to understand where we're up to in the progress. Are we halfway or, yeah?
Yeah, so all of the BIA workshops have been completed, and then there's kind of a variety of completed BIAs. So all of them have had a first draft, which is where the business unit or team have actually completed it, and it's then gone to the risk management team for review. And now we're just in that kind of finalisation phase. We've probably got about 6 that I would say are fully finalised, and the rest are in various stages of final review.
So I guess a follow-on question from that, but there would have been something previously. It's not like there's a complete absence of anything. Would that be fair?
There was some previous BIAs,
Yeah.
But they, as part of our refresh program, are substantially different now.
Okay.
More focused on detail.
Look, I'd just like to ask one question which might make you despair, but I just want to get a bit of clarification, please, Nick, between SR7, which is failure to deliver work programs, versus the operational risk critical asset failure. Because one is outside appetite, the first one, the other one is well within appetite. I'm not saying the two should be the same, but perhaps I'm just trying to understand the distinction, please, of what we're trying to govern and manage here.
Yeah, so Strategic Risk 7 primarily looks at the shortage of supplies impacting on our ability to deliver our work programs, versus Organisational Risk 3, which is looking at our failure of critical assets due to our choices or underinvestment in those assets. So a slightly different perspective on very similar causes.
I was, without wanting to make this a long meeting, I was just trying to, I figured that, and my concern was that I suspected there was a stronger tie-up, and so I was worried about the risk rating of either, because, as you said, we have supplier, and I think they're going to get tighter, by the way. I think when we start looking at the World Economic Forum stuff, as I'm sure you'll take us through at subsequent meetings, there's the risk, but then it must also potentially have an impact around our capital program. There's nothing particularly rocket science in me saying that, because it's happening elsewhere around the country. But I was just interested to see that one was fine, the other was actually out of whack. Don't worry, I just make that as a statement. I'm not asking you to do anything more on the spot. Okay, look, I sense folk have had a good chance. This is a good read. And, in a sense, I'd love to go into bird flu, which, we don't want in this country. Very interested in the detail you've given us around water and Lake Taupo and issues around that. It's good. That's tremendous work. And it actually is a comfort in its own right to give me a sense that, I was about to say, we've got your beady eyes on this. That's probably unfair to put it that way. But, we have got this focus around risk. But I would, at a different stage, for instance, Max, be very keen, for instance, to see that these sorts of connections are made within the organisation between what we're seeing here in terms of risk, but actually what you as governors are seeing elsewhere that give a reality to actually these risk assessments. Perhaps, Nick, that's something I could ask you to think about in future reports. I need to hold us management to account. Are we doing what we're saying as a result? So I'd be keen to tighten that risk appetite discussion a bit more. It's not because it's being deficient, but I think it could be an improved bit of viewing that we could see. Okay, can I move us then to, there are no other questions or comments at this stage. Can I move us then to the resolution, which is that we received Nick's good paper. Seeing I've done the talking, I'm going to move it. Carol, your second, thank you. Is there any comment on the motion folk would like to make? I've probably already made my comments, so thank you, Nick. Appreciate that. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, it's carried. Right, we have a small change, as I've said. We'll deal, Sarah, if we could. Sarah? I can see Sarah there. Yes, she is. She's aware of the change, Gary? Sorry.
She is aware, but I'll probably do the lead into this paper.
Okay, rightio.
And
So
leave
we're
some of the
moving
other
to
ones
what is currently listed as item 13 on our agenda, other independence assurance updates and reports before we meet with our internal auditors, KPMG, who are online. So thank you, Sarah. Take it away. Or Gary.
So if the committee recalls those who were here, when we discussed the internal audit program in the December meeting, I identified that I thought there was an opportunity for us to take a step back and reframe what we were trying to achieve in terms of bringing independent assurance to this committee so that it had oversight of the complete assurance program. I find, and without going into too much detail, that the terminology internal assurance is becoming less relevant because a lot of it is done externally. On page 78, under point 7, I've shown the framework from a risk management control environment perspective. And what we're kind of talking about within this paper and the portion that is assigned to KPMG is that third level piece. And it's quite often now called the third level in independent assurance, because that's really the critical thing you're looking for from an oversight perspective as a committee, to know that there's been an independent assurance test over and above management's control environment of the control aspects across the organisation. So we took the opportunity between that meeting and this to take a step back, look at what was on KPMG's program, look at the other work that was being done through independent assurance in the organisation, and identify those to start to develop a wider frame of assurance documents to be coming back to this committee. The key ones on here that you'll identify from the KPMG work program, we identified we already had consultants effectively providing the independent assurance across cyber security. So we took the opportunity, rather than simply repeat that work with KPMG, to utilise that review. And that is coming through the public excluded, given the nature of the security aspects associated with that. Deputy Mayor O'Leary asked in the previous meeting for us to clarify what we were doing and when relative to the communication integrity review. That again was on KPMG's work plan. We identified that the nature of that would be better supported by a specialist rather than KPMG, who do have a lot of skills in that space, but probably not as deep as we would have liked. And talking through with them, we've agreed to shift that, and we've now engaged a independent who will do that and bring the report back to us in June if we can make the meeting, but more likely September. And then you'll see within the report on the table under point 23 on page 79, this is probably what I'm talking about in terms of the wider level of independent assurance work that is carried on across the organisation, to give you insight of the types of things that under good practice would normally be coming to this committee. So we will now, through to the next meeting, go away and build this into a calendar of when these things occur and when you can expect them to come back to this committee. Other than that, Sarah, do you want to add anything or take it as read?
Brilliant. I like this. That's superb. If we're going to be in the game of risk, we actually want to have the assurance. And admittedly, we've had that, both with internal, but now with KPMG's external report. But actually what I like about this, Gary, is that you are reminding us that there is a framework of existing reporting, particularly in that table, which we should be seeing to try and gain a broader sense of comfort, which I would like to be able to provide to full council, that our controls are working and we are doing the best we can in light of those strategic risks. So it's a brilliant paper. Folk, do we have questions or comments? We do. Ewan.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Gary, thank you for that update. Can you help me understand, as a governor, in my role as an elected member, what checks and balances does management go through when appointing sort of independent assurance experts, in terms of ensuring that they work independently from the very manager or management that's appointed them, and so that we get direct and transparent and an impartial commentary on all of these critical layers. Because, I have a follow-up. But
There's a couple of things we do. So one is testing to make sure anyone through the procurement process that we're identifying, we test what other work in that space they have done and whether the people involved in them are separate and independent. We are working on identification of who supports a delivery, which I describe as the independent assurance champion for the organisation. But at the moment, it's essentially Sarah, but I'm not sure it's exactly what her job description should be covering with the future fit change. I think when we identify that role plays a critical part, standing outside the entire system for giving that review and basically having the ability to say yes or no that meets the standard or not.
so can you reassure me that when you conduct these processes, the scope that you're asking these parties to put forward solutions or investigate or make inquiries are driven from an impartial... I'm walking through a fine line, Mr. Chair. But you get the essence of what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to test that we're asking people to provide assurance, and the people who are asking are the very people that we would want them necessarily to be telling us if something's going wrong. And I'm not getting that assurance. Where we used to have an independent internal auditor in the building in the good old days, and they were always so easy to approach. So can you help me get more confident that this isn't just a tick box exercise and we are actually going to get independent, forceful analysis and assurance?
I can absolutely tell you that that's what the program of work does. And I think the framework for that, the independent auditor you're talking about, although it's not specifically the independent audit assurance champion I'm talking about, largely does a big piece of what you're describing. I just need to identify where those skill sets sits within the organisation and how to deliver them most effectively within budget. The other piece that I'd probably reference is that the scope of the audits themselves are generally either set through legislation and compliance requirements, or where they're not covered and directed by that, executive identify the scope, and that scope is brought back to this committee and agreed in terms of a 3-year program. So the scopes of the audits are actually reviewed, they're set by management, executive, undertaken across management in the third layer, but you do see them before we then go and do them. Not the individual ones, but the scope of the program.
And how does council make a contribution to that process? Because we've got independents sitting on this. It's not the majority of council. How do governors play a role in determining some of those things?
Beyond the delegations to this committee, I would imagine that the balance of the council is at times reviewing what is coming through the committees, and this committee, you'll appreciate, reports into council. So the opportunity to identify any feedback to work that's done within the agenda does exist through that structure.
Okay, thank you.
Ewan, I like your question, by the way. And I was very happy to entertain it. You said you're walking a fine line, and it's not about people or performance. I mean, it is in one sense, but it's actually about how we structurally do it. Look, broadly as chair, look, I'm comfortable. Obviously, I'm comfortable with this paper because it's actually giving us a sense. You look at that table; those audits are the sort that Gary is saying are set. When you get a pull safe audit, we don't determine the scope. They're going to come in and they're going to test it, and we're going to get a report out of it. The fact that we now have visibility, and Gary will give us a calendar when these will be coming through, is actually really important. So, in a sense, you're going to get the unmitigated report and response. Clearly, it'll have a management response with it as well, but at least we'll get to see the report. I think perhaps the higher sense of what is discretionary, which is really what we now achieve through KPMG, we need to confirm a couple of things. One, I would put it this way, working with Lance and his team, this committee gets to see firstly, what is the charter under which KPMG work? So it should provide them with the independence. The fact that they're also outside the organisation is helpful as far as that's concerned. Secondly, on an annual basis, we should be affirming what is the program. And actually there's a third point, which is that we have the opportunity as a committee to meet with the internal auditor without staff present. So that's pretty conventional, if I can put it that way, Ewan, but that actually is giving a level of credibility to the strength of what Gary's outlining here as the 4 lines of defence. Okay? Brilliant. Sarah, you've got a question?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I was just interested in the comment on paragraph 8 that we did have an internal audit function and then now we don't, so we use KPMG. What was the reason for that? When did that happen, and does it still stand that that's the best way to do it?
I couldn't give you an exact date, but it was prior to when I started, nearly 2.5 years ago. Probably in approximately 3 or 4 years ago, I would estimate. And I can't comment on the reason for that.
I'd suggest, having been through it in other organisations, generally it's the nature of assurance has increased, and so the complexity has increased. And having an independent like KPMG and the framework of control they have is quite often seen as being more effective than having internal staff doing it, because to Councillor Wilson's issue, the challenge is always how independent is that role, whereas KPMG have their own control environment and in fact aspects behind their consultancy that mean they have to follow a certain set of rules that strengthen the assurance that can be provided. That's generally been one of the biggest drivers in the market for shifting from internal audit function to assigned external parties. We still do some internal assurance work, but it is less frequent.
Thank you.
Look, this has been a very good discussion, and thank you, Ewan, thank you, Sarah. Gary, I wonder if we could have this as a staff action, please. It would be useful, I think, for you and I to have a discussion post-meeting, because I'd like to make certain that we are giving truth to the reality. We need to see the internal audit charter and arrangements in the way that you've raised questions about, Sarah, and also we make certain that we see the internal audit program, and actually just work through why that should give us a level of confidence, Ewan, around the effectiveness of this, and it not being impaired in any way in terms of its independence. And I mean this as a structural issue, not because we're about to hear from KPMG or anybody else under the sun. It actually is about having that confidence. I think there's one or two things that we could do that will benefit the committee, which will be able to be useful for the rest. Are there any other comments folk would like to make at this stage? Yes, Ewan, go for it. Oh, you wait for the debate. Okay, cool. Well, in that case, can we go to the motion then, please, unless anybody else wants to make it, which is that we receive the report. Do I have a mover? Thank you, Carol. Do I have a seconder? I'm happy to second that. Right, debate. Ewan.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Having been here since 2001, I fondly remembered the impartiality of our internal independent auditor. And I was surprised that this organisation chose to move away from that model. I hear Gary's commentary, but one of the problems with the current process is we schedule well in advance areas of interest, one of the things that I really enjoyed about the independent internal auditor in the past was the random nature. They had the ability to start to question and go into departments. And therein lies something that gives me a huge amount of reassurance, where we've got this somewhat predictable management-influenced area of investigation. I actually found real value and strength of the unpredictability of the independent internal auditor. And I recall that it was a gentleman at the time that I remember stumbled across a lot of very interesting and helpful stuff to governors. And so I'm not convinced that this current model works particularly well. I'm certainly not convinced that it's any superior to what we had in the past. And I'm very confident that what we've got now is a whole lot more expensive than we've ever had in the past. And I have a feeling that as we go into the new election, there may be all sorts of desires to have a really good look at some of the processes and for the elected members to set some of this critical policy direction rather than the other way around.
Okay. Look, inspired by yours and Sarah's comments, as I said, I think I'm happy to commit that we put me together with Gary and we just, not that we rethink it through, but actually I think we need to just be clear the committee is doing all its right work. Appreciate your comments. I'm going to put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against? It's carried. Thank you very much. Thank you for that. So we're sort of semi-back on agenda now, track, which is the KPMG report, and I suspect we've got some good folk from KPMG online. Just checking, Benita and Mataza, welcome to the meeting, you guys. And it's good that you've heard the previous conversation as well. We certainly value you being here, so we will keep to the topic of the internal audit, but I suspect you can help us as we move forward from the last paper later on as well. I think we're probably straight into your hands, Benita, so if you'd like to kick off your paper, that would be great. Thanks.
Kia ora, and thank you, Chair. So very quick update from us for this quarter. We don't have any internal audit reports to talk through. You'd heard some changes to the plan that Gary's already alluded to. I'm on page 63 of the report. The only other two that Gary hasn't mentioned is there was a climate change maturity assessment scheduled, which management's got a lot of remedial work already underway, so that has been deferred to future years. And the Future Fit Simplification Program Controls Impact Assessment, mouthful of a review name, that is actually the scoping for that review is already kicked off and scheduled to begin the fieldwork in Q4. So we're hoping that we can bring that in front of the committee in Q1 of FY26. So those are really the four updates that we wanted to highlight to the committee for your information.
Thank you, Benita. Short and sweet, that's great. Do we have any questions or comments for Benita or Mataza? No? Yes, Ewan, go for it, please.
Thank you for the report. Can you just remind Council what the annual fee is for KPMG to provide their internal audit process?
Gary, are you going to take that one? I can talk to the process.
I think it's actually probably what the council is committing to it rather than necessarily any individual number that you're doing over particular audits, which would be useful. Benita, look, just seeing Gary's looking at the answer, can you just give us a short, see really what is behind the KPMG offering, if you will, expertise and what have you, that actually gives us, I'm sort of reopening the prior item was TAD, that
Yes.
the KPMG brings to it, please. That would be helpful just while Gary's trying to find the answer.
Thank you, Chair. And just sort of extending from the conversation previously, I don't think the model has really changed from what you had before. We did take over from another independent provider as your co-source partner. So it's very much still a co-source partnership. And by that, I mean, we come in and we provide you specialized reviews and wherever, internally management can do some reviews in-house as an in-house function. I think that model is still in place. But to Gary's point, it's just finding, some expertise so that can be centralized. So that's very much how we work. The annual program, just for the committee's benefit, we did bring that for your review and feedback. We did make some changes, added the communication integrity, which we have now taken out and is being done by another provider. So that process is in place. In terms of the cost and fees, I think management's got a budget that we work to, and we would size the program to meet that budget. Individually, for each review, we do a detailed scoping exercise, and then based on that, that's the costs are agreed. So it's quite a flexible process. But the whole sort of essence behind internal audit is to make sure that we are giving you assurance on what really matters, things that really matter, and not necessarily having to do everything, which is not possible, with capacity, and obviously working within the remits of a budget. So that's basically how we work, which is why I can't specifically say that's the number or the fees. But I know that Gary's still trying to work through a budget that balances how much is provided by outside assurance and internal. Is that helpful, Chair?
Very helpful, Benita, and I think Gary's got an answer.
Yeah, so I can confirm that the internal audit budget set for the 2024-25 year is 150,000. What I would note from the previous paper, and I think it speaks to the issue that Benita's raising, is that management manages the delivery of staying within that budget and the apportionment of who does it. So by doing what we're doing in the cybersecurity space, I anticipate that we'll save 25,000 against that budget this year.
So that would, sorry, Chair, so that would be so you'll be running you'll provide a surplus back to the organisation.
Yep. Thank you for that. That's very helpful, and thank you for everybody for being up front. I suspect we have no more questions.
Just one.
Oh, you go for it. Go.
To Gary. Gary, do we itemise as an organisation, do we report annually on the accumulation of surpluses within each department? Because we often hear about, oh, well, we've generated a surplus or a manager's underspent against their budget. Do we report on that to the governance, to the elected member?
At the highest level, we report on it within the forecasting framework to the Finance and Monitoring Committee. What we don't do is try to track that down at a micro level, because I think that the cost of monitoring that and tracking it would be extremely expensive. Because there are across the scale of this organisation, there are multiple areas where you will have variances of some kind between the budget and the actual delivery. That would be...
Sure. But does that not mean, in theory, level 3, level 2 managers could actually have situations where things have gone very badly in a particular project, but they're able to use surplus funds from projects that have gone well, and we then don't get optics of it?
Gary, this is actually a really important discussion, but I wonder if this is one more for your committee, Max at Finance. This is actually about how we monitor. I would think, Ewan, the level we should be looking at in this committee is that strategic risk level. It's a very valid question, but I just think it would be one that would be in Finance.
Just under our standing orders, could you point to me is this not the committee that risk is discussed?
Yes, but I'm thinking you're looking for clarification here around process of management monitoring.
Sure.
And I think, and I'm trying to reflect, I think that's a very good question, but one that would appear in the Finance Committee. I'm interested in strategic financial risk, our SR2, which is really important. And what do we have that shows our performance against that? That's at a level that's a lot higher than actually how perhaps the Finance Committee operates, how it gets comfort from management around that lower level of detail in terms of financial management.
Well, Mr. Chair, I have to accept your ruling, but I am fascinated by it, and I'll save my comments to the debate.
Fine, thank you. Okay, do you have any other questions at this stage for Benito? Actually, that's probably where we're at. Yes, okay. There are none. Do I have a mover and a second that we, receive the report? Thank you, Carol. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Anna. The debate. Ewan.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I am becoming more concerned by the moment that strategic risk and assurance is really not what it says it is. This is the second time, I think, in this meeting where I've found myself being somewhat stymied by the Chair's ruling as to a desire to make some inquisitorial attempts to get a true and insightful response from staff, and this repeated deflection and reallocation to other committees, I think is unhelpful, respectfully, Chair. I think this is the most important committee where we as individual elected members and the independent appointees should be raising these questions. This is where the buck stops, right? This is supposed to be the committee that we create to reassure ratepayers that there is a robust process where these things can be discussed. So I am concerned that your interpretation is not reflective of our standing orders, and I'm not totally convinced now what actually the terms of reference are for this committee, because if it's set up to limit my ability as an elected member to really start to dig deep, start to ask some questions, and you're going to defer them, I'm concerned, and I'm beginning to wonder why we have this committee.
Thank you, Ewan. I'd make some preliminary comments back at that. One is, firstly, the topic that was in front of us was the internal audit program, and we amplified that by what was the budget. We then went into a finance discussion, which I have said is valid, but at a level that I think would be relevant. I'll go back to my point, to the Finance Committee. I'd like to reflect, Ewan, that I indicated in the strategic risk debate, I'm very interested and want to know more what about this council being outside its risk appetite really leads to. Because that worries me. Worries me in the sense that the correct governance response is to understand what is management doing about that. Now, I didn't use that to dig deeper, but I have signalled clearly to the committee I want to understand better if we are living outside our appetite, and we certainly are under SR2, what does that really mean? So I would want to just, from a personal perspective, push back slightly. I am very concerned about it, and I am concerned what is management's response, because that is our role. I would invite you to get some clarity, perhaps outside the meeting, or even in a discussion with Maxine, whether that's the Finance Committee at that micro level. I would really argue our role and more time should be spent discussing something like SR2, which is actually the negative impact on our financial strategy as it stands. Thank you for your comment. Do we have any other questions? Welcome, Paula. Do we have any other questions or comments folk would like to make at this stage? We are in debate phase of the debate phase of the paper. There being none, I'd like to put the motion that we receive Benita's report. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against? It's carried. Thank you very much. Welcome, Lance. Appreciate that. Paula, thank you for the efforts you guys have made to come back to the meeting. I appreciate that. That's been very helpful, Lance. We have deferred your paper to the end of the public agenda. Is that comfortable, or would you like to speak to it now? Do you want to gather a breath, and I'll carry on with the actual agenda as we have it. Right, it's now up to item 11, which is the Audit New Zealand update. Momentous day for us because we actually have essentially done a generational change, haven't we, Sarah, in terms of our auditors? And I presume you'll introduce them a wee bit later on. I have jumped in front of myself, haven't I? The organisational improvement. Sorry, I'd written a line through that. The item 10, please, organisational improvement report. Thank you. Any questions for Sarah on her report? We're making good progress, so thank you for that. So I'm going to propose from the chair, from the chair that we receive the report. Do I have a seconder? Thank you. Is there any debate on the motion? I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against? It's carried. Thank you very much. Right, Sarah, now I will get to my generational change in auditors and deal with the Audit New Zealand update, please.
Right. So you would have received some late attachments to this report this morning. There was the audit plan for the 24-25 annual report, the management letter relating to the 23-24 annual report, and the final sign-off of the Devonshire Trust audit for 23-24. So staff have been working very closely with audit to both close out the last audit and to start planning for the next one. So we're very pleased here to have with us Ethel Graham, who's the new audit partner appointed by Audit New Zealand, and Kat McCown, the audit manager. So the audit engagement letter from the prior year remains in effect, so there is no new letter to be signed. You will have seen the accounting standards review, so there's no critical accounting standard changes. There'll be no material impact from any of those changes to the annual report. The most significant impact expected at year end is in relation to the revaluation of the asset box for waters. That includes water supply, wastewater, stormwater, land and buildings. So this is always an area with significant work, and with the significance of it in relation to the CCO asset values, we understand it will be highly scrutinised. So we are working closely with audit to establish and agree clear milestones to enable us to meet the required timelines. I will allow Audit New Zealand to speak on behalf of the audit plan, just mentioning that we are working with them to establish more clearly those timelines and some more detailed milestones along the way.
Table. Ethel, if you'd like to come down, Kat and Erica, you're part of the team as well, please come down and see it. Perhaps while they're coming down, just to reflect, Clarence and Norde were our previous directors and managers. And while you'll explain it better than I do, Ethel, within the external auditing fraternity, there is the concept of rotation, the need to bring a fresh set of eyes into an audit, and I think Clarence had been our auditor for, what was it, 6 years, I think, Ethel, it was time to change over. And while Audit New Zealand is still our auditor, within the firm, obviously they have offered, and we've accepted her clearly, Ethel, Kat, and indeed Erica, their colleague behind, as well as being the new audit team. Ethel, appreciate the fact that you've met with a good number of us as part of an introduction process, which I've found very helpful. So you're here now, welcome to the meeting, and look, keen to hear about both your report and the plan, please.
Yeah, maybe. Good. Thanks, Kat. Yeah, kia ora tātou. So as been mentioned, there's been a rotation of auditors. The appointment of auditors in the local government sector is a decision made by the Auditor General, formally, from a group of appointed auditors. So he's selected me for this, which is great. I'm excited about. I've never audited Hamilton City. I've audited a lot of councils across certainly the North Island, most recently Auckland, and also chair the local government sector group within Audit New Zealand. So I'm hoping I can be of some value to the council in terms of our engagement on the issues. And one of my goals is to have open dialogue with management, and certainly the governing body is where I'm able to make sure there's no surprises, and hopefully that's a mutual way of working. So just on the audit plan, so if I talk to that first. Yep. So the audit plan is a draft at this stage, and it's based on discussions with management and our understanding of the issues that are in the sector and in particular in Hamilton City Council. So at this stage we're happy with the plan. It is a draft. We're interested in comments from the committee that might influence our audit focus. In here is a high-level timeline, and as has been mentioned, we are still fine-tuning how that might work to make sure we are able to issue the audit opinion on the agreed dates. I'll just walk through, if that's okay, just a high-level summary of the key issues. So number one there on page 2 of the audit plan is, as been mentioned, the valuation of infrastructure assets. So we understand Council's planning to do a revaluation of the 3 waters this year, building and land assets. So this is a complex area with a lot of judgment and assumptions. So we will spend a fair bit of time here making sure that we're comfortable with those assumptions and judgments. And obviously the valuation of those assets has a direct impact on the depreciation expense in the annual report. The second issue we have in here, actually I'll just comment on the valuation of assets. We've been talking to a lot of our councils in the sector about the importance of understanding how unit rates are developed, and normally a council will develop those unit rates based on an understanding of recent contracts, and those recent contracts will give an idea of what the replacement value is of these key assets. So we do have some metrics we use to assess those unit rates, but we're also encouraging councils to really own the development of those unit rates with their external valuers to understand what it's costing to build infrastructure at a fairly granular level. So we'll be doing some detailed work around that this year. The second issue in here is it's called the fair value assessment of infrastructure assets on page 4. What this is really just ensuring that for all your assets that aren't being revalued this year but are held at fair value, that there is no likelihood of a material movement. If there was, then council would need to value those assets as well. So we need to make sure that that assessment's done early and there is no material movement. Page 5, fair value of investment property. So council records investment properties at fair value and is required under the accounting standards to value those at every reporting date. It's not a huge balance compared to your infrastructure assets, but still there's some significant judgments around how those are valued, so that's an area of interest for us also. On page 6, we've mentioned in here, just given the council's balance sheet, councils by their very nature build things, and managing the capitalisation of those costs in a timely way and making sure that only costs that meet the nature of capital are actually recorded as such is an area of focus for us. We've noticed and had discussions with management about the WIP balance, so we're interested in some analysis of that WIP balance just to make sure that everything within there is properly recorded as an asset and capitalised in a timely way. Page 7, we've headed this one reporting entity. It's just something that we're encouraging management to think about in terms of how the annual report's presented, because the one subsidiary in the group, being the Waikato Innovation Group Limited, is being wound up. The annual report may not need to be a group annual report, so that may reduce some complexity around the reporting. But that's a decision that management will work through, and we'll make sure that the implications are captured in the annual report this year. The rest of the audit plan from page 8 onwards are fairly standard issues across all our councils. So there's a point in there on page 8 on fraud risks and the council's responsibilities. There's some interesting nuances around legislative implications for the annual report. Councils are a bit more complex in terms of the requirement to report information in the annual report, so there's just I guess a reminder of those to help understanding of what needs to go into the annual report. Probably the only other thing on page 9 I would mention is we're keeping an eye on what's happening with the New Zealand Mutual Liability Risk Pool scheme. There is some risk that there may be calls across the sector. If that happens, that may result in some liabilities being recorded in balance sheets at the end of the year. On page 10, you'll be well aware of the legislative program around local water done well. We've been having quite a few discussions with management about the implications of that for the LTP. But also as council starts to make decisions, we'll be talking to management about how that information is best presented in the annual report. There could be significant decisions between balance date and the time the annual reports were signed by council, which could mean that there's some information to be disclosed in the annual report. You'll also be aware that the government has been talking about they've been talking about publishing benchmarks. Some of those benchmarks will be drawn from the annual report potentially. So if that's the case, there may be performance measures and metrics in the annual report that become or attract more attention than they may have done previously. So that means we may have a role in auditing those a little bit in a bit more detail. So that's a watching brief really. Page 11, we've just got our we disclose our materiality levels, and that's at the planning phase. That might change as we go. We have 2 layers of materiality, so some big numbers there. One relates only to the valuation of infrastructure assets, so that's the big one. And then the other lower materiality relates to all the other items in the financial statements. Pages 12 to 14, 12 to 15, we list the measures in your performance report that we believe are material. No substantial changes from last year. And the rest is really just about the process. So I'll stop there on the audit plan and happy to take any questions. Yep.
Thank you for that. So the current state, it's actually in draft, if I understand it correctly. You're just finalising one or two comments, but particularly the dates for delivery of the annual report and delivery of the actual audit opinion, correct?
Correct, yeah.
Right, which is post the elections in effect.
Yeah.
Yep. So I was talking with Gary this morning, we'll have to figure through some way, that's not a critique by the way of your timing, but we'll have to figure some way in which we make it capable or better for an incoming council to be able to go through a process which is essentially adopting our accountability. So we need you to work with us on that one as well. Do we have questions? I do. I've got Carol, I think, coming up. Thank you.
Thank you. I feel like this is possibly a question more for Gary, following on from our conversation this morning, Gary. It was just about on page 4, around the fair value assessment of infrastructure assets in the non-revaluation year. I just, you know, we were having that discussion around potential risk and exposure, and I just felt in the committee it's probably quite good for you to just share what you did with me this morning about transport and water already being covered. Yeah.
So within the accounting policy, recognise we do calculation across the whole of the asset pool every year to see that is still within materiality. To support that, we do 3-yearly revaluations of different components of assets. Some components of assets are actually done on a yearly basis, but the major parts, which are transport and water, we do those partly to manage resourcing requirements from one year to the next. The comment I had this morning was, over the last 3 years, and I think Athol is pointing to it, those inflationary pressures on contract prices have meant that we've had to consider the frequency, and there is probably more volatility in those revaluations now than when inflation was stable.
Thanks.
Thank you there, Carol. We're okay. Max?
Welcome, Ethel. It's really great to be able to see you in the committee and to have you coming in and doing our assessments for us. Thanks for that and your report. It's a late report, as I realise. You talk about the potential for benchmarking. Might balancing the books be one of those measures that could be benchmarked across councils? Is that something that you would think would be a part of that?
It's the Minister's decision, but I think that was signalled in the Cabinet papers, but someone else may.
Yeah. And you're aware that Hamilton City Council uses a slightly different measure in our balancing the books calculation, keeping out the capital revenue from that to give us a more accurate measure around providing for our day-to-day costs being covered by the income. So is that something that you understand, being new coming in?
Yeah, that makes sense what you're saying. There are mandatory benchmarks, what you're describing sounds like one of the mandatory benchmarks, so which is really...
And that, yes, so that we also do report on what the government balancing the books entails as well. Can I be assured that it would be the government balancing the books that you would benchmark or be used as that benchmark rather than our own harsher, harder balancing the books measure?
You will need to report against the mandatory measures.
Yep, thank you.
And then if you want to put other information in there, we would need to think about what work we do on that.
Great, thanks very much.
No problem.
Thanks, Max. Sarah?
Thank you, Chair. And hello, Athol. Thanks for being here. I am interested in a couple of things. The risk pool issue. What do we know about that? Like, what's the likelihood of something coming through with a call on councils?
I'll just hand that back.
Probably one I could cover. So there was a call made on risk pool members, I think it was, if not last year, the year before, relative to a judgment on leaky homes in Napier. There is now a risk that creates further calls. There is also, and it's in the public arena, particularly associated with Bay of Plenty Regional Council, some claims from individuals and insurance companies relative to the Edgecombe floods, and there is a potential that could have an influence on risk pool as well. We do disclose these items within our annual report and our contingencies.
Why would that one? Cause that was that was a while back, but it wasn't that long ago. Why would that one be a call on risk pool? Well.
The Edgecombe flood was for a period that was covered through the risk pool components. Not all councils were in every single year, and I would have to check Hamilton's alignment with it, but we know that there are some councils that were within risk pool during the Edgecombe flood period.
Okay, and we don't have that budgeted, right? Because it's somewhat hard to predict what it will be, or when or if.
Absolutely, and we make that comment in the annual report again, that we do not believe we can assess the likelihood of the value of the claim.
Yeah.
Sarah, it was reflected as a contingent liability without a value, because the call is determined by the board of risk pool, depending on their situation and the years in which you are involved or have been involved in risk pool. So given these relate to dates when many councils were in, it is a risk, but it's unquantifiable at the moment.
Okay, thank you. And with the valuations in terms of infrastructure, transport infrastructure, this is a really specific question, so we don't need to go into it right now. But I had a resident question our method of valuing our bridges, and did meet with our staff to ask about that. But I'd just be interested in any further commentary, if you have any, when you do the work around looking at how we're valuing things.
Yeah, all I'll say through Bruce is that we'll definitely comment.
Yeah.
But this year the valuation probably not going to include bridges.
Yeah.
But maybe in next year's annual report preparation process, the roads and bridges may be captured, so that might be an opportunity to look at that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and I can take it offline. My understanding of the thing was, whether their concern was that we didn't include the full valuation of fully replacing a bridge, and the question was whether you should do that or not, or just the pavement on top of it, I found it hard to get my head around, so that's why I'm asking just for some.
Councillor Thompson, can I suggest that we take an action just to circulate a brief and as simple as we can summary of what we do for bridge valuations?
Yeah, we talked about it for an hour, and then it just has slowly, it's drained out. I just wanted to pick it up again.
Thanks, Sarah. Accounting is always simple. No, it's our own language, isn't it? Thank you for that. Is there anything else then that we need to be talking about under this item, the management report?
Look, just on the management report, so all I would say is, I know it's a late item, that it's still a draft. If there's questions, I could potentially answer them, or Kat could answer them, but I'd say management and the previous auditor haven't yet landed the comments, I think. Is that fair? Yeah, so it's probably more there for information at this stage, but...
Well, thank you for that. We will take it on information. Clearly, we need to see something that has got a final agreement between management and you, Ethel. But look, if there were questions on that now, I firstly appreciate that even if it's late, we have got it as a heads up, which you're obviously debating. But if there were questions folk would like to raise, that's fine. Paula, I think you have.
It's a complex arena that we're all stepping into with the LTP amendments and annual plans and all of those kind of new things as well, new processes. One of the issues last time, and it wasn't just for Hamilton but across the country, was the timeliness of Audit New Zealand being able to do their work and finish it off and not hold up our processes of final approval, releasing the report, etc. You don't foresee any issues with that this year if you're working regularly with staff? And I know that in the end that's what was happening. You were in the office almost all the time, a lot. But that was helpful because we were waiting on the final. Do you see any issues? Because this is new territory, local water's done well, etc.
Yeah, so we have, through Bruce, we have been having lots of discussions with management about the timing of, and I'm assuming you're talking about the amendments necessary for the water services delivery plan and the CCO that's
And
been
even
thought
the
about.
adjustments within our transport budget and things, and accounting for that in a transparent way.
Yeah. We don't, so there's only certain things that we're required to audit.
Yeah.
The transport bit wouldn't be one, so we're
Right.
definitely not going to hold that up.
That's good.
In any way. But if the LTP had to be amended legally, then we would be involved. But at this stage, I understand that's unlikely to happen before July. Yeah.
So, yeah, if there were any major adjustments to financial policy or whatever as a result of, I don't know, politics or necessity, either or both, then that could potentially be an issue.
Yeah, look, we would,
Fair.
as soon as we were aware, we usually get a call from Gary or
Okay, cool.
James or Blair. Yep.
Just last thing, on the appendix 1 on page, there's page 20 of your late attachment, just looking at the status of previous recommendations, you had the manual processing of weekly timesheets, and it says the new system has not been implemented and will be postponed till 2026. Can I just understand why it's being postponed? What it was?
That's related to the implementation of the new payroll HRA system. So it will be implemented as part of that whole project.
Sorry, say again.
It will be implemented as part of the HRIS system,
Okay.
of the new payroll system. So
Okay.
it's part
So
of...
the only
it's-
delay is because of that new
Yeah, so
that
it's
new
been,
software.
it's as part of that project which has been delayed.
Okay, okay. And I do smile at the reef for Anzac, but I do, because I know how that happened. We were one short next to Judith Collins and a few things, and she had one and we didn't, and we had to immediately get, So anyway, it was all done. But I presume that has now been tidied up in terms of the staff, so they understand how to manage those unforeseen things that need to be spent immediately and accounted for.
Defer to
That-
either Sarah or Kat.
It was put down as a koha, but it's
We believe it was accounted for correctly in line with the delegation's policies, so we don't believe that there was any issue with the way that was handled and approved.
good. Thank you.
We agree.
Because we do.
Yeah, we're still working through the comments of that management as provided in that management report, so I can't confirm that until I've had another look at those comments.
Because in itself it's one reef and it's a small thing, but we're constantly in that position of having to provide international gifts or some other thing, and it'd just be very helpful to know what it is we are supposed to do about those in those situations and what latitude there is. And glad to hear that it was, because we were a little bit worried at our end. The staff that were processing that felt a little bit concerned they may have accidentally done something inappropriate.
Yeah, so we're still, just as Kat's alluded, we're still to land the final comments on the manager report, so we'll just reserve our judgment there.
You can see it's a matter of interest, Ethel, so that'd be great. So look, I make the presumption that this will be cleared and we'll get the final report delivered to our next meeting, which would be wonderful. Thank you. Any other questions at this stage of Ethel and Kat and team? No? Can we move to the resolution, please, which is that we receive the report? Do I have a mover and a seconder, please? Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Max. Any debate on the motion?
Thanks, Bruce.
There being none, I'll put the motion, please. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, it's carried. Thank you. Thank you, Ethel. Thank you, Kat. We'll hear from you guys later. So we've done item 13 and we'll go on to item, I've got 12 on mine. The compliance reporting, please, Mish. That'd be great.
Thank you, Bruce. I think I'll take the report as read, and if there are any questions, I'm happy to take those.
Thank you. Folk, do we have questions on this report, please? It's a deafening silence. Mish, are any of these of concern? I mean, I think you probably are going to tell me that they're all under control. I was interested that we had some, for instance, that were deferred and wondered, as I always do in this situation, presumably we have an existing policy it's adequate to work under that, other than the fact that it's getting a wee bit old?
That's correct.
Yeah.
There's
correct.
nothing in there that's mission critical.
Right, okay, brilliant. I was very interested, and I presume it's coming under your committee, Max, was the funding needs analysis policy. What actually is that? That sounds awfully like a rating review, is it?
So I can probably cover that.
Okay, Gary, what is it?
As part of legislation, you're required to have a funding needs analysis done in justification for your revenue and financing policy. So it identifies outcomes, etc., which guide your mix of funding, and then that analysis and justification is represented in the revenue and financing policy. Because of legislation shift and the potential of moving towards the CCO, as we're moving the water rating from general rates to targeted rates, we need to update that part of the policy.
So the policy is actually a support to your revenue and financing policy, the preliminary work, rather
Yeah,
than the revenue and financing policy itself.
Yeah, the funding needs analysis is actually not a policy in itself.
Yeah, okay.
It justifies the revenue and financing policy and is required to be done before the revenue and financing policy or supplementary to it through legislation.
Yeah, that's great. Sorry, Max.
And that would come through the annual plan, long-term plan amendment process. That's correct, isn't it? And through the council route rather than the finance committee, is that correct?
Yeah, I stand to be corrected, but my understanding is that that change has been adopted by council already back in the
That's
February
correct.
meeting.
At the February
Yes.
meeting, you signed off the
Yes.
funding needs analysis and the revenue and financing policy, and it's included as part of the consultation shortly.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments folks would like to make? Well, again, I think we should note there is nothing exceptional in the sense of matters else that you report on there. So thank you for the fullness of the report on those policies. I'm going to move from the chair that we receive the report. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Max. Is there any debate on the motion? There being none, I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, it's carried. Thank you. Lance, I was about to jump to the resolution to exclude the public, but then I realised I was excluding you. So look, welcome, and look, thank you for the commitment. As I said, again, for you, important to be here when I know you've been busy this morning. So we are in your hands. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair Bruce. You've obviously read the report. I'll just add a few new bits and probably just some further information around a couple of the points. Just around the central government policy direction. Look, you're all aware of probably weekly announcements by government on various initiatives, and as we've said there, we're just making sure that we keep our relationships with the government departments as close as possible. As I said, I think last time we were at this committee meeting, that there's been a few challenges around that because they're all public services going through some changes and further change through Sir Brian Roche's work. But we're doing as much as we can to make sure that we're working with the right people, and probably heartening from the meeting that Mayor Paula and I were at this morning, the Upper North Island Strategic Alliance. Minister Bishop was there, and unfortunately that's why we're late. So apologies, his plane was a bit late from Wellington, but it was a good discussion. You know, the latest is the announcement about development levies last week, and to be honest, probably some of the lack of detail around that, even though it sounds promising. The heartening thing we heard today, even though, you know, you think there's a whole lot of risk involved in that in a whole bunch of different ways for council and probably developers and landowners and that sort of thing, is the approach they want to take around co-design of the legislation to make sure it actually works for local government, which was quite heartening to hear. And I think, Blair, some of our people have already been involved in that and will continue to do so. So I think that's a good sign coming through from probably the new Minister of Local Government, but also from Chris Bishop's got a wide range of portfolios that deal with everything we deal with, from transport to infrastructure and RMA reform and that sort of thing. On the local water's done well. I just mentioned in there the probably the emerging risk that CEs have talked about is as we go through public consultation and then CCOs are established over the next wee while, is I think if you're in the waters game and you're a waters expert, you're probably going to be a preferred commodity on the market, and the number of people is probably limited in New Zealand, and so I think it's how do we actually ensure that as we go, well, should we go through public consultation and the decisions to actually have a two-council CCO as we've proposed, is making sure that we hang on to our good folk that we've got. And I think it's important that we have the conversations with Waikato Water's done well and other entities, so that we don't have a whole big headhunting and cannibalisation going on, to be honest, right around New Zealand. So we're putting, Sean Hickey and the team are putting quite a bit of effort into that to make sure that we look after our people, keep them informed, and make sure that they feel valued through the process. Just on the local government side of things, I've already touched on it through what Ethel was talking about, and also Gary, just some of the what we've seen come through from the former local government minister, the announcements, is just looking at around performance reporting. There's a number of reports coming from government. There's been cabinet papers and the talk of benchmarking, which, as Ethel said, obviously we'll hear probably more detail on that from the Minister's office over the next wee while. And some of the discussion that's been happening at a local government New Zealand level and right across New Zealand is the government's exploration of things such as rates caps, which is a very interesting topic. And I've been at a number of fora over the last couple of months, and there was a couple of presentations, one from South Australia and one from New South Wales. And New South Wales had implemented rates caps, which were there were some interesting views on that. Most of them were quite negative around that. South Australia, there've been a lot more dialogue and relationship building between their state government and their local government to actually work through what are the issues that state government think are actually in play with local government. So there's differing views out there, and happy to circulate some of that information. But I think we just need to be prepared for that discussion as we go. Probably not a great time to have that discussion coming into an election year and over the next few months for elected members, and even for central government coming into their election next year. The economy, economic conditions, look, we're all hearing everything every day, what's going on there. I think it's trade war, tariffs, all that sort of stuff. Probably on the good side of things for New Zealand and the Waikato is probably the beef and dairy product prices and payouts, which is good for our local economy. But probably on the downside, me leading into a segue into something which I didn't mention in the report is probably also the drought that is starting to take effect in the western Waikato area and around Hamilton. You know, it's as Paula and I have just driven back from Auckland, and it's brown the whole way. It looks like it's been sprayed with herbicide. So, that can affect farmers and then spending across the community and into businesses that are in Hamilton and that sort of thing. So, I think we need to be aware of that. And probably the thing I haven't mentioned here is just something we need to be cognizant of is just around if we end up with low flow levels on the river, and we're at alert level 1, and just making sure that we're prepared for if things continue to be very dry over the next 6 to 8 weeks, especially in the Taupo catchment where our water comes from. So we've been in this situation before, I think about 6 years ago, and we've got our contingency plans, but just something to put as a risk, just to put in the back of your minds as well. And the other thing is, which I know we've mentioned before, Calvin's on top of this, working with Regional Council and Biosecurity New Zealand, is just the risk of bird flu. And it's sort of gone a bit quiet from the outbreaks in those 2 chicken farms in the South Island, but bird flu is coming. DOC are quite concerned about it. Obviously, we look after some natural areas, not as much as some other councils and that sort of thing, but we also have a zoo, so there's a whole bunch of work going on there as well. And the other thing is we aren't, if we do end up with deaths of birds, whether they're native or domesticated, then the disposal of those becomes, you may not think it's our issue, but it probably will become our issue in a number of ways, so just bearing that in mind. So I'll leave it there, Mr Chairman, happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for that, Lance, very helpful. Do we have questions for Lance at all on his very clear paper? Lance, Max, go for it.
It wasn't in your report, but you just mentioned it with regard to the water levels and our corresponding alert levels. We do have a 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'd noted it somewhere in the papers in today's reporting. Is that a lineal across which we would go from level 1 to 2 to 3 or 4, or could we skip one and get into 1 to 3? I just was concerned about the observation that you and Mayor Paula made about our dry and barren landscapes.
I'll defer to the 2 waters experts down the back, as Myri and Andrew are sitting there, so I'm sure they can answer that question better than me.
Good afternoon. Yes, we can move to whatever alert level is appropriate for the situation that we're trying to manage. So in general, alert level 1 and 2 are very much focused on sustainability and trying to drive sustainable use of water. But level 3 and 4 is where capacity constraints might be apparent, and we need to respond with more harsher sort of restrictions for the general public. If we were to implement our low river contingency plan, then we would probably be looking at alert level 3 or 4 just to ensure that we could continue that supply of water to the city.
And what sparks the review of the level in terms of, are we looking at it on a weekly, monthly, whatever basis, and what would be the milestone that we would need to reach for the next level up?
Yeah, so we are monitoring our alert levels on a daily basis. So it's very much, there are a number of parameters that we use to determine whether we should move alert levels. For sustainable use, it's very much around the actual water level used. We also look at the comparison to the wastewater system to see how much water is being used outside. We also look at what's happening in the Waikato River, and especially in Lake Taupo, and we look at historic trends. Anniversary weekend is generally one of the biggest weekends of the year, so if that's approaching and water use is going up, then we might make a call to increase the alert levels. So there's a number of factors that lead into determining what alert level is most appropriate.
Thanks, Mari. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks a lot for that. Do we have any other questions for Lance? Lance, I just had one, perhaps it's an observation, but perhaps I should put it as a question. I'm interested in what's our relationship like, I guess I'm trying to get a sense of, with the department, and actually are we aware of the approval process for our water service delivery plan? I have a concern and a risk that we don't know what is the reaction of this government to water service delivery plans. I have no trouble with where Hamilton's at. I'm worried about actually a fair number of councils struggling to get anywhere, and us getting washed up in a general sense that local government can't do it, and perhaps even our solution not being acceptable.
Are you talking about their capacity, Chair Bruce, or?
Accept what we propose.
I think it's probably a wait and see, but to give you some assurance that we're working with officials like on a weekly basis. You know, and I've said this before, I'm actually quite proud of our team because I think we're helping to influence the way they're shaping things in a pragmatic way. So I'm quite confident that we'll be fine. I can't comment on some of the smaller councils that probably don't have the resources we have. They might find it a bit more challenging. But the Minister did say last week that, and senior DIA officials at the local government hui that Paula and I are at, that they will ensure that DIA staff give those councils that aren't that well resourced as much help as possible. It's mainly staff time and advice, things like that, rather than any money or anything.
Yes, be very interested, Paula, thank you.
Because on the Friday, which was the combined sector day, and unfortunately, Lance, you had to go home because of that unfortunate accident with your daughter, but so the Minister was there, they spoke to it. Was it Minister Watts? He'd been there earlier in the week, spoken to it, but the key influential cabinet ministers, all speaking to this topic, have made it quite clear that if a council wants to go alone, they'll take a very dim view to it if nothing changes. And they've said that in my presence multiple times. We are not happy for status quo. So there are some councils, and I'm aware from the membership that there are at least maybe 15 or 16 councils that are lagging in that respect. They will be given a please explain. And the Minister's message was, or Minister Bishop, what he said, and Mr. Watford, if you are struggling with how you should go forward, talk to a DIA representative this week, now. Do it now, because we won't be accepting late last amendments, and we're not accepting that which doesn't fit with our expectations. So it will be interesting, but I think Lance is right. I bumped into the Minister of Local Government on Wednesday and talked to him about the difference of our water body and the Waikato region one at large. Just wanted to make sure he was happy with it, and he is. So he understands the two entities and how they give effect to government legislation. That's fair to say, isn't it? That we have been in. So I don't think there's any risk to Waikato or Hamilton Waikato district.
And Andrew's going to give you more assurance
That's
now.
brilliant. Yeah, go for it, Andrew. Thank you. And thank you, Paula. I appreciate that insight. And Andrew, appreciate yours as well.
So the question, as I understand, was in relation to the risk of the approval of the water services delivery plan.
So I'm saying, is there a risk with ours?
So, well, no one's been through one before, so there is always a risk. But so we're going at a considerable pace in partnership with Waikato District Council. So we're preparing 3. So we've got all options covered, and we're preparing those jointly. So the Hamilton first cut draft water service delivery plan, and the Waikato District Council first cut draft, and a potential joint CCO combined first cut draft will be available at the end of April, and that will be tested with DIA. So we're well ahead of the timeframes. And so not only are we in constant contact with DIA, our intention is to test that completed draft document as well. So hopefully that gives you some assurance. And also because of the pace at which we're going, I agree with Lance. So we've been very influential in how DIA is approaching these things as well.
Brilliant. I made a joke to Blair that I've been a choir boy for the approach of Hamilton, Lance, if that's of any help, and I still remain that way. But actually, no, thank you. I don't want to be dismissive of the fact, Andrew, that you are trying to get the water service delivery plan in front of DIA early in draft. Actually, these are good mitigants against a modest risk that's somewhere down the track. We put it in, and there could be some form of rejection, modification, or indeed influenced by having a what do they call them, a Crown facilitator. So look, no, that's been very helpful. Thank you for engaging with me on that. That's wonderful. I'm going to see if somebody's prepared to move acceptance or receipt of Lance's report. Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Max. Is there any debate on the motion? There's none? I'll move it. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, it's carried. Thank you very much. Thank you, Lance. Appreciate that. Can we move to the resolution to exclude the public? Thank you, Ewan. Do I have a seconder? Is there any debate on the motion? There isn't. I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, it's carried. Can I suggest we take a 5-minute break, people, please? We need to get the room cleared, but if we keep it relatively close to 5 minutes, that'd be great. Thank you very much.